All right, all right, all right. It is week 8 in our class, which really means next week is it. And we have a big week this week. So, hopefully you've gotten this as I've worked through this class. I've done everything that I've asked you to do. And in this case, I really observed myself as I was working through the content that I had originally lined up for this course, right? So in this course, I have been doing, once we did the 2 group projects and then we were coding along, and then I had weeks where you just coded along. I did all that. I had to write the instruction. And then as we started the project, I was doing that. And I really got to a point at this week when I realized that the content in Dave's course is so good, but it's really beyond the scope of what a class with this duration and these what we call student learning outcomes is really. So I decided that this week, looking at what we're doing, which is doing layout, responsive layout with grid and or flex blocks and media queries, right? These topics really needed a little more time. I had originally had a scheduled to do Dave's, I believe, variables and functions for this week. And I decided against it. Now, here's what I want to say about that. I definitely recommend, and I'm going to myself, is I've already actually reviewed most of that content, and that is good to know. But for the purposes of what you want to walk away with this class, really what you want to have is nailed those fundamentals. Is you know how to style a page, right? You know how to apply the box model, right? As we done last, you know how to handle images. You know how to set up a semantically correct, I guess, proper page, right? You want to be able to use semantic elements and get away from divs and spans whenever possible. And I really say don't use them, right? So in this week, I decided that I would have us walk away for the course purposes of the course, some days content, and really give us a little more time, I hope, to focus on getting these last really important fundamental skills into the course. So thank you, Dave. I actually just finished reading the attendance where I mentioned, by Dave Coffey, and almost everyone, I think everyone said how much they appreciated what Dave does, man. That's just such a gift to give. So, and continue appreciating it by finishing it, right? But for our course, we're not going to. Okay, so this week we are going to have, right? So you're going to see this coming in. Is for week 8. So for the Monday night item, you'll do Flexbox, you'll do layout. So now, and I said this when I was recording that video, is like we already did in styling in week 2. Do some of this. We did a layout. You kind of came up with whatever you thought was, would work using those skills that we learned in chapter 1 through 13. And then so this week we take that and we actually formalize it into a layout. And then, and again, I'd say in this case, Flexbox and or grid. I use grid. I had been wanting to use grid. I'd been wanting to learn it. And so I really took the time to, understand it. Because here's the other thing, is like the way I'm grading this work is how your commits. I'm looking at your progress, right? Because it's really easy. I get this, to go out and there's so much examples of stuff that you can just pull in and use. But if you use something you don't really understand, and part of that is I'm going to look at your documentation to see how well, right? Your documentation is your commits. It's also, and I actually need to go and update both of the items for this week, because I want you to, give some context to how you created your layout with grid. How did you approach your media queries? What were, give some content to that, because that's really what you want to do. Even if you get inspired by something out there, you always want to understand something you're using, because that's you're learning at that point. So that's the other thing I wanted to say about this week, is that That part about I'm looking for progress, I'm looking at your commits that way. I'm going to add the documentation. I forgot to add that on the videos or have that as a mention, so I'll do that now. And the other thing I want to say is a class like this, it is really tempting, and that's kind of where I was headed a minute ago. It's really tempting because there's such good examples of good websites out there, right? Is to compare what we're doing here to that. I mean, I've done it and I went out because there's so many good examples out there, but really what you're doing is this is not a design class, and we have those on campus over at the GRC, and they do a great job of helping you understand colors, looking more at, making this thing beautiful. Really what we want to be able to do is use these skills of, because writing HTML and CSS is the fundamentals of web development. You want to nail understanding how to use CSS to style, what that particular rule set does to the page. That's the stuff you want to nail. And through the process, if you can create a site that functions and it looks okay and it's, got a color scheme, I mean, that's a good outcome. If you can walk away saying, you know what, I can create layout with grid or flexbox, or I can write media queries. I mean, these are great outcomes. And it's very easy to compare. I mean, I say this because we're moving into our last week, which is next week. And this is where we're all going to share out what we've been working on. And it's so normal to want to take a shortcut to use something that you found out there, but it's not the goal. It's really not the goal. The goal is for you to nail the fundamentals. That's really what I wanted to say coming into this week. So next week is our last week together, right? Definitely the sooner you post. And I took off because, we had two sections, referring back now to Dave's course, the two sections on images. And that's the one that's the last one I'm going to have us do on the final project, is take everything else and then also implement some of that cover page, which will be nice. I definitely am going to do that. To play around with that and see how I can make it look on my page. But then you also have to consider that when you're doing that in relationship to your media queries. You have to think about that. So these images affect everything, and of course, images are everything often, right? They speak. They say, what is it? A picture is worth 1,000 words. I know we've all heard that before. It's true, right? So anyway, as we prepare for next week, so here in week 8. As we come into 2 items focused on the project, walking away from Dave's content, right? First gen of this class, so many things going on. I just want to preface by this week by saying, try not to get, just follow the process of what we're working through. Learn as much as you can. And part of the reason I decided to kind of do the schedule this week was also to give you some time to go back. Like I said, when you watched the video from me for layout with grid, I went back and reviewed that whole section from Dave and re-implemented in my existing P2 version what he showed in the grid. And then I went and found some other content that also helped me really understand that. And that is very typical. I think for me it was very helpful. Took me a little while to wrap my head around grid. It just did, because I had used Flexbox, but I hadn't really used grid at all. And I just heard such great things. Now I get it. I get why people love grid. Makes life so much easier. Anyway, enough from me. What would be my question from you this week, right? Course feedback is always helpful at this point. I know by looking at tutor utilization, some of you have been seeing Zach, which is great. I've talked to some of you, which is great. As we come into the last week. So here's what's going to happen. In addition to the 2 things you're going to add are the 2, the Flexbox and or grid and the media queries. I'll also have you add another additional page for each of those. And then on the final project, I think it'll just be adding, making the thing, adding images with some of the like clip art things. Was it clip art, that selector that it was so cool. I remember it was Jane, right? I'm going to go back and look at how he did that. I'm going to figure out a way to maybe have my content somewhere reflect some of that. It might be up in my head, or that may be as well. But having that also cover is really, I think, very impactful as well. You don't want to overdo images, right? But you can use them to convey a lot of meaning. Okay. Anyway, have a great one. And I start working on week 9 right now. I'll talk to you later.